In this video, I will be attempting to survive 100 days in Greenland in hardcore Minecraft. This means I'll have to survive the extreme cold, aggressive mobs, and even some mythical creatures, all while I explore the incredible wonders within this Arctic island. Can I survive 100 days? Let's find out. I spawned in and saw that I was in a rather mountainous area. However, upon seeing some mobs on this ridge, I decided to climb up it. Hello? Hi. Okay, you just be on your way then. I'll be on mine. Oh, we have another one. This innocent interaction was short-lived, as I knew I would need food, especially for this episode. And with that being said, my next objective was clear. I needed wood. I climbed up this nearby mountain to get a better look around me and hopefully spot some trees. Only this is when I remembered something very important. There is only one forest in the entirety of Greenland, and chances are I wasn't near it. With that unpleasant revelation, I descended the mountain and started collecting some blocks, as I would need to build a temporary shelter before nightfall. As I started building my mossy shelter, one thing about Greenland was apparent to me so far. It is stunning. And this fact was only proven further as the sun began to set. And within my modest house, I got a great view of it. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. As the storm raged on through the night, I had an unwanted visitor at my window. So I put myself in this corner and decided to do the daily Wordle. And for those of you wondering, I got it on my third guess. Yes, I know, very impressive. The rain continued into the next morning, but eventually it cleared up. So I left my shelter with a new and very important objective in mind. I needed to find a structure. So I climbed the mountains, all the while following the coast, as that would likely be the best chance of finding something. However, I climbed carefully, as I knew that at any moment I could start freezing. Regardless, I continued my travels up and over the mountains, which took up a majority of the day. But as I climbed this particular mountain that afternoon, I found exactly what I was looking for. Only, as I approached it, I realized that it was actually something much, much better. Ilulissat is a mining town in southwestern Greenland. Only there's one important thing to note about it. It is entirely abandoned. Having been established in the mid-19th century, this old mining town was used primarily to extract cryolite, a rather rare mineral that ended up being essential during World War II. However, the mine was closed in 1987, and now many of the buildings sit vacant, representing a true ghost town. I started to swim towards Ilulissat, but almost immediately began to freeze. So I headed back to shore and reluctantly began collecting blocks, as I would have to build a bridge across. However, as I started bridging, the sun began to rapidly set, meaning I had very limited time to get there. I ended up just jumping in the water and swimming, before reaching the town and beginning my search for a bed. Mobs were spawning everywhere, and skeletons were shooting at me. Missed. So I quickly collected this moss and blocked myself inside this shed. And, as it turns out, that wasn't a bad move. In this shed was a collection of foods, and on top of that, I found this knife and pan. And when the sun finally rose on Ilulissat the next morning, I emerged from my shed and started to look around, beginning with this large building. Inside I found not only beds, but cobwebs as well, which would be helpful as I could get string from them. As I continued searching the buildings, I found these blueberries and a Viking helmet of sorts, as well as a dirty water bottle which I just had to drink because I needed water anyways. As for the rest of the loot, some of the highlights include these night vision goggles, a pickaxe, and some iron that I had to mine. So far, this was turning out to be a great start, especially for what I was planning to do this episode. See, in this episode, I will be sailing all the way around Greenland on my very own ship. My starting point will be here in Ilulissat, meaning that I will end here on the very southern tip of the island. Now, with that being said, there were some things I needed to craft in order to have a working ship. Okay, so yeah, that's not really terrible, I wouldn't say. This might be a bit more difficult. Yeah, glass pane, that's gonna be the real tough bit here. In other words, the items that I now needed were gold and sand. So, the next morning I crafted an iron pickaxe, and went out to go and find the gold from the mine. This was easy enough, as plenty of ores were left exposed. So, I found some gold, mined it, and then started to smelt it while I crafted a shield, before then beginning my search for sand. Having been around the settlement though, I knew that there wasn't any sand here, so I would have to search the nearby fjords for some, which meant I would have to craft a boat. Oh yeah. Only I once again start to freeze as soon as I entered the water. So I collected some more string and crafted some wool from it. And the very next morning, I finished crafting some wool clothes. This would keep my temperature warm as I sailed through the icy waters. Speaking of, that's just what I started to do, and while I searched the fjords for sand, let me tell you something interesting about Greenland. See, unfortunately I wasn't able to find a kayak texture pack online, only this canoe one, and you might be wondering why that's important. Well, the kayak actually comes from Greenland. The kayak was invented thousands of years ago by the Inuit people of Greenland, and I can't imagine a better place to use one. But as far as sand hunting goes, I pulled over to the side of this fjord to see if this pinkish orange material here was sand. And it turns out it actually was. So now it was time to get crafting, only now I had another problem. I needed more wood. So I quickly went back to Ilulissat and left it the next morning, now with wood. Only as I left the abandoned town, I stopped dead in my tracks, as a figure stood on the mountainside. That's lovely. That's a good way to get this going here. That's nice. That's good. Love to see it. Moving past that, it was now time to get crafting. I made the helm, and then started on the engine, which would be the last piece that I needed. So while the stone smelted, I began construction on my ship. And on day 7, I finished my engine and carried on with my shipbuilding. I didn't actually have a design in mind this time, as I kinda wanted to figure that out as I went along my journey. But with that being said, it was time to test it. Okay, moment of truth. Here we go. Okay. It is a bit bouncy. And as I spotted a whale nearby, I knew that my journey around Greenland had just begun. I found myself navigating through a maze of fjords the very next morning, only to eventually spot some flat land nearby. So I decided to explore it, hoping to see some wildlife. Yet the further inland I went, the more desolate and snowy it became. After camping here for the night, I awoke the next morning to see that only ice lay ahead of me, and that's because I had come across the ice sheet. Second only to the ice mass within Antarctica, the Greenland ice sheet is huge. So huge, in fact, that it covers about 80% of the entire island. That's right, 80% of this island is this. An absolutely brutal polar expanse that averages around negative 31 degrees Celsius or negative 24 degrees Fahrenheit in the very center of it. So, having no interest in hypothermia, I headed back towards my boat. Only I almost made a fatal mistake in doing so. Having learned my lesson in Norway, I knew that I had to be very careful around polar bears. So, as soon as they both fell asleep, I passed by them. Soon enough, I made it to my boat and continued out to sea. On day 10, not much happened, just a lot of sailing, and since I didn't have any fuel in my engine, all I could do was take in the scenery around me. Next day, I went mining, as I needed coal for my engine. So, I dug into this mountain and ended up with only 4 pieces of coal. Yeah, not great. But as I continued sailing through the mountains, I decided that I wanted to climb one. So the next morning I set off to do just that. Only I found myself distracted by these geese. I eventually killed this one and then just got to climbing. Yet as I climbed, a sudden darkness surrounded me. I didn't have much time to think about that though, as powdered snow was everywhere. But soon enough, I made it to the top of this mountain. And while the views were nice, I gained literally nothing in doing this. So yeah, back to the ship. Oh, and did I mention that Greenland has very unpredictable weather? Day 13 was rough. The mountains around me looked daunting in the stormy fog. But I eventually decided to leave the fjords and head for the open ocean, where I would be expanding my boat a little. I desperately needed to find another settlement soon, as this boat wasn't looking too great. And after falling into the water with these drowned, I just decided to go to sleep. But the next morning, I saw a rather nice view. And then I headed further inland and explored this new fjord. This is when I decided to check my progress. And upon doing so, I saw that I had only made it this far. Yeah, not ideal. This only confirmed that I needed a ship upgrade, as this thing was slow. However, hope came on day 15, as when I reached the end of this fjord, a structure appeared in the distance, and a rather odd one. It looked to be a research facility of some kind, and it was inhabited. So I explored the smaller building and saw that it had some food. I then heard some villagers having trouble in the powdered snow. Oh? Look, that wasn't my fault, alright? I was clearly trying to save him. Why are you in the shopping cart? I went to explore the big satellite, and after walking up these spiral stairs, I found this room. Yeah? Is this your room? This room had some cool loot, like this wool chestplate, and this creeper backpack. I also found these 2 journals. Give a talk, seen again, mountain wanderer. And then excavation has begun on an 11th century Viking ship off the coast of eastern Greenland. Artifacts suspected. Okay. And after putting 2 and 2 together, I figured that the second journal was referencing this red dot on the map. And this was confirmed when I looked in this other chest. So I kept this shipwreck in mind, as I could definitely try to explore it when I reached that area. But now my mind was focused on a very important ship upgrade. And it looked like this place had all of the resources I would need. So, let's cue the music. I started to break apart this smaller building, before beginning work on an entirely new ship the next morning. I also fell through lots of powdered snow, but eventually began mining this deep slate roof. Oh, and I ate some tentacles which ended up blinding me, and led me to wake up on day 17 to a beautiful view. Before then building up my roof and noticing that ice was approaching my ship. So yeah, I needed to speed this up. I ended up finishing up my roof before transferring all of my items over the next day. I also went to get the shopping cart, but after having it almost kill me, I decided to just leave it. So I instead got this food. Before moment of truth number 2. Yeah, perhaps the cabin is a bit heavy, but you know what? It works. So I sailed my way out of the fjord, and eventually continued up the west coast. Oh, and that night, I slept underwater, just like in the Bermuda Triangle. On day 19, I pulled over to do some quick mining for coal, but I also made note of the fact that there were polar bears nearby. Anyways, I got lots of coal, but nothing else. And as I went to leave, I saw that one of the bears was right outside. So, I just ran for it. The next morning, I filled my engine and continued up the coast, now going at a much more bearable speed. I continued to search the waterways as I went, but it wasn't until day 21 that I would feel the need to stop again. I saw some wildlife on this flat bit of land, and after clicking on this reindeer, actually ended up riding on it. I absolutely love this. But as I continued to look around, I found a rather rare sight. See, normally walruses don't come up onto land, especially on Greenland's west coast. But I'd found 3 of them. Only my fun was soon interrupted. I wanted to take this reindeer back on my boat, but that would involve me riding near the figure. So I very carefully got on the reindeer and slowly made my way past it. And I swear it was staring right at me as I rode away. Upon reaching the boat, though, I crafted a lead with this straw I had. Only the lead somehow made the reindeer disappear. Yeah, that confused me a good bit. But luckily I had another plan. The next morning I went out to try and get this walrus in my boat, but had no luck. And of course the figure wasn't there anymore, and to make matters worse, I accidentally hit it. And these things do so much damage. So I went back to another reindeer, and ended up making a bridge to my boat. And soon enough, I had it inside the house. So I continued up the coast, and Freddy seemed to be adjusting well. On day 23, I sailed my way inland a bit, only to see something really cool ahead of me. However, I soon realized that this was not just one iceberg. See, I was actually in a rather famous location within Greenland. The Ilulissat Icefjord. Just north of the Arctic Circle sits a bay dotted with massive icebergs, broken off from the nearby Qinngua Glacier, and it is unreal. This World Heritage Site is one of Greenland's most visited wonders, possibly thanks to the nearby town as well. And as I spotted this town, I immediately docked my ship and got ready to take a look around, as perhaps I'll be able to craft another engine now. As I explored this town, I also saw some wolves, only this one didn't look too friendly. I continued exploring the next morning and found some pretty nice loot, the highlights being these cobwebs, which I could get string from, this iron, and this food. I started taking apart one of the houses as I wanted to add another level to my ship. I then broke some cobwebs with my newly crafted sword, and then made some floaters, which I placed below the cabin. On day 25, I finished most of the next floor, before then spending my day collecting resources like roofing. But this paid off, as the next day I was able to finish the second floor. I then collected a few more materials and began crafting another engine, which I would finish on day 27. Now it was finally time to set sail again, so Freddy and I set off, and I was really liking my ship design so far. However, as we continued along the Greenlandic terrain, I checked my progress. And while we had made it a fair distance, I knew that I was about to enter the toughest leg of this trip, as only desolate Arctic lay ahead of me. In other words, from here, I was on my own. As I sailed on the open water, I knew that I would have to mine for coal sometime soon, as my fuel was out. After spotting this whale, I pulled over and got to mining. I ended up just finding 2 pieces of coal, and eventually went to see what time it was outside. Oh. Okay. What? I immediately ran back through the mine and was quickly able to sleep. But the next morning, I had to figure out how I would be escaping this mine. I started mining an alternate path out, and while I found a bit more coal on the way out, the creature's noises also grew louder. Until eventually... Okay, you stay there. 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 Okay. Alright. Okay. That made Valentino jump out of my lap. So, that is unforgivable. Even though I didn't end up getting much coal, I left fast. And now it was apparent to me what I was dealing with. The Qivitoq is often described as a dangerous spirit wandering the mountains of Greenland alone. It's said that the Qivitoq is someone who has left their community due to guilt or anger, and is left to wander the icy lands in the form of this immortal spirit. This creature is so well known in Greenland that supposedly the Greenlandic authorities have responded to multiple alleged encounters with these beings, but all I know is that I needed to stay far away from it. On day 30, I continued north, taking in the Arctic scenery around me. I also saw some more polar bears, but nothing interesting happened for the rest of the day. In fact, the next few days were just sailing, as I explored the fjords and saw nothing but large mountains. Oh, and I did run out of fuel for my engines. Which is why I was more than happy to see what appeared to be a camp on day 35. And while it was abandoned, it had plenty of loot left, like these wooden logs which listed themselves as a fuel source. But when I checked the barrels within the tent, I found some genuinely good loot. So now it was time to add to my ship. I sorted through my inventory and began a minor upgrade that I finished the next morning. And yeah, I loved my new deck area. But turns out the wood doesn't actually work as a fuel source. It lied to me. So instead, I started making some charcoal. Only that's when I heard a familiar sound. What in the world are you? You're not the normal guest that I have, but alright, yeah, that's fine. The trades were useless, but I did box him into my base, as I couldn't just let him be out in the cold, which is why I invited him permanently to my base. But with my new additions, I placed my limited charcoal in the engines, and set off once more. At this point I was making decent progress, but I still had the top of Greenland to cross, which I can't imagine will be easy. But as day 37 rolled around, I tried to figure out how this cauldron worked, when this happened. I could only assume that this meant the Qivitoq was near me, which also meant that it was following me, so I just continued on my way. Although I did have one worry. I would need more fuel very soon. But luckily for me, another structure came into view. What is this? Unsure of what it was, I decided to take Freddy to go and check it out. I put him in a temporary stable and then went to enter the building. Okay. Oh no, that is not okay. That is not okay. Yeah, I kept my distance. And as soon as it fell asleep, I quickly ran inside. After closing the doors behind me, I looked around, only to see a lot of nice loot. That was mostly just food. The basement was especially cool, as this seemed to be some kind of cheesemaker's house or something. However, the next morning, I knew that it was time to escape this house. I made a hole in the wall to keep an eye on the polar bear, only this ended up making it angry. So now he was awake and prowling around the house. So I had no choice but to break through this window. And run. Okay. Eventually I jumped in the water, even though they are great swimmers. But when I turned around, I saw him approaching Freddy. Nah, you stay away from Freddy. You stay away from Freddy. I was able to break Freddy out and we ran back to the house. Okay, I have a very important choice to make. Because there is wood in that house and in that tree. That's probably the best bet I'll have for fuel. Because I don't want to go mining again after, that thing. I'd rather deal with a polar bear, to be honest with you. I just would. I reluctantly headed back towards the bear with Freddy. Only this time the bear wouldn't budge. So I decided to just risk it and get some wood. As I explored the attic, I also found some cobwebs that I quickly got some string from. Finally though, I brought Freddy back to the ship, and started on the charcoal as we set off again. At this point in my expedition, I was reaching this curved part here, so in order to save time, I decided to cut across the open ocean. And this meant that I could sail through the night. And I'm very glad that I did. The next morning, I put the charcoal in my engines and carried on through the icy waters. That is, until I spotted a rather large shark. This certainly made my trip a little bit more unsettling, but I just pushed on and sort of removed the shark from my mind. But finally, on day 41, I had spotted land again. I followed this jut of land further west, as soon enough I would be crossing the top of Greenland. However, my world once again went dark. The Qinngua was near me, so I just kept sailing, no stopping. This eventually led me to heading north again, as I was now getting into the true depths of the Arctic, and it was almost surreal. Next morning I kept along the shore, but around midday, something large came into view. It was a huge ship, and hostile by the looks of it. However, it also had a lot of logs, which I could use as fuel. So I got in my boat and rowed up to it. I entered from below and was able to sneak some really good loot, like these 2 diamonds. But I soon saw many pillagers within, and they started to fall in the water around me, so I had no choice but to row around the boat, and that gave me this glimpse of the horrors below the water. So yeah, with that in mind, I just left. But I had a plan. Next morning I got to work on this plan, a plan I've done many times in this series already, my favorite way to deal with pillager ships. And as always, it was very fun to watch. I approached the now shipwreck to try and salvage some logs, but after hearing some eerie noises from below me, I left, and carried on into the Arctic. Only I also noticed that a certain wandering winemaker had vanished. Yeah, genuinely no idea where he went, but best of luck to him and his donkeys. Next few days were just more sailing into the vast Arctic. I made it relatively far on the map, and at one point, I even spotted some orcas. And on day 48, after waking up to an amazing Arctic view, I spotted something colorful in the distance. After seeing that they were tents, I docked my boat and started approaching them. Only there were lots of polar bears nearby. But I reached the tents the next morning and found some unfortunate remains. That's also when I found this trail. And yes, of course I had to follow it. So I did just that, while occasionally falling through the powdered snow. And, after almost being jump scared by this reindeer, I found myself at an open hole in the ground. We sped off as fast as we could, not even bothering to look behind us. But when we finally reached the shore, I did take a quick look. And of course, I didn't see anything. So I got my boat and left immediately. And look, that was genuinely one of the worst jump scares I've had in this series. Yeah, that might just be the worst. I don't know, but I hated that, and now I'm sailing away as fast as I can. Next morning, I woke up and realized that it was already day 50. So after the fun events of yesterday, I want to take this day to say thanks for watching this far into the video. And the comment who guessed the location first was the rat that got yeeted. And just as a general rule, if you guess more than one location, I will only take the first location you guess. And yeah, you get a Qinngua. Yes, it will be delivered to your house via FedEx. Alright, with that being said, the only other notable thing to happen this day was my fuel ran out. So yeah, great. However, luckily for me, my next stop was on day 51, as when I entered this bay area and saw some tall mountains with a large sheet of ice between them, I realized that we had made it to a rather famous glacier. The Petermann Glacier is a massive glacier connecting Greenland to the Arctic Ocean. At 500 square miles, or almost 1,300 square kilometers, this glacier, and all of the ice that separates from it, is simply huge. In 2010, an ice mass broke off from it that, according to the USGS, was 4 times the size of Manhattan. But this glacier also contains scenic anomalies, like its famous Blue River, that cuts through the icy walls and runs into the nearby fjord. I brought my canoe out and began rowing up this river, while looking at the scenery around me. But the next morning, I decided that I would have to do some mining and just get it over with. I would need a lot of fuel for the next portion of this trip, and I had none. So I dug into the side of this mountain, and while I did find iron, I only found 2 pieces of coal. I also constantly checked my surroundings, but yeah, I knew that I was in for a long session of mining. That afternoon, I started on a 3rd engine, which I finished up the next morning, and then I almost died thanks to this drowned of the trident. Regardless, I did even more mining that afternoon, and same with the next morning, where I found lots of coal but was sure to seal every doorway behind me. But even with that tactic, I still had this happen. So I mined my way out and filled each engine with as much coal as possible, before then continuing up and across the top of Greenland. The landscape got flatter around me, but I was now entering the northernmost part of the world. Now, Greenland actually houses the northernmost piece of land in the entire world, Kaffekloben Island. Yep, no other land in the world is closer to the North Pole than this. And even though a rather unpleasant storm arrived on day 56, I continued my journey. The storm did provide me with a very unsettling, if not slightly funny, sight. Yeah, I have no desire to go to Mob Island. Once again, the next few days were just me sailing. As it turns out, there's not really much at the top of Greenland. The storm ended up continuing for another day, but as I crossed over the top of the map, I found myself once again without fuel. On day 64, my boat drifted through this scenic fjord, as large cliffs formed on either side of me. I had been following the coastline for a while and had now started down the east coast of Greenland. But as the cliffs got even higher, I recognized this area as one of Greenland's most remote wonders. Independence Fjord is a large waterway that cuts deep into northeastern Greenland, and its dramatic cliffs are strikingly tall. Around the fjords are traces of 2 separate indigenous groups who lived here around 4,000 years ago. But now the fjord sits as an incredibly remote landmark for the few eyes that are lucky enough to see it. I found a spot to pull over at and decided that it was time to make the next floor of my base. I had lots of concrete saved in my chest, so I got to work. And the next morning I built up the 3rd floor. But that's when I noticed that my ship was sinking. So I crafted many floaters and placed them underneath the cabin. And while that did fix the problem, I now had a new problem. The ship was incredibly slow. So on day 66 I did some mining. And I actually ended up finding lots of coal and iron this time. So I began work on crafting 2 more engines, and after doing some mining the next day, I finished the engines. At this point, I wanted to take Freddy out so we could see the fjord properly and ride along it for a bit. So I brought him out to try and climb the cliffs. Once again, it had found me. But this time, I wanted to see if I could hurt it. Like, I was getting a bit frustrated with how frequently it was showing up and just jump scaring me. So I approached it. And immediately changed my mind. Freddy and I went for the boat fast. We started to head back out to the Arctic waters when I saw one of the eeriest things I have seen in this series. Next morning, I happily filled all of my engines and set off, not planning to ever go on land again. But on another note, I was really liking my base. Like, look at this. Anyways, I was heading down the east coast now and making some decent progress. And that reminded me of the shipwreck that was on this side of the map, so I kept an eye out for it as I sailed. Only I now had 2 of my engines already out. Yeah, I hate finding fuel. But while I continued sailing, let's talk about the MVP of this episode, one of Greenland's most important animals. The reindeer, also called the caribou in North America, are found naturally in the Greenlandic wild, as they are inhabitants of the Arctic tundra, and while they can be used for transportation in Greenland, they are most commonly used for food, as reindeer meat can be found in markets and shops all across Greenland. Now on day 71 I kept along the coast, until I saw what had to be a pillager tower. And yes, of course I would be destroying it and using its wood for fuel. So I approached it cautiously, and saw that there were some Malays trapped outside it. Still not sure what it is they do, I just decided to release them and then went in to fight some pillagers. There are quite a few, but I used my Thailand maneuver to wipe most of them out. And soon enough, I had killed them all. So now I just had to take apart their base. I started breaking every log I could find and ended up with over a stack of logs. So I went to the boat and started on making the charcoal. And on day 72, I went to properly loot the main building. And the loot was just genuinely bad. But it didn't matter, as I had plenty of wood now, so I filled my engines with charcoal and headed further south, all the while keeping an eye on the ocean floor. Next day, I redirected my ship to go into some deeper waters, as I was getting very close to where the shipwreck supposedly was. And on the evening of day 74, I had found it. But there was one issue. Sharks were swarming the area. As someone who has a very real fear of the deep ocean, I hated this. The only good thing was that these sharks were Greenland sharks, and there is only one recorded shark attack in history from them. But that also doesn't mean that they don't have the capacity to do some very serious damage. I kept this in mind as I equipped my diving gear the next morning, and got ready to head down. I hate this. This is not my kind of thing. You guys probably know that. This is not my thing. Yeah, I hated this. I eventually reached the shipwreck, but now had to face a horde of drowned that were all slowly advancing on me. So I guided them away from the shipwreck and swam back over to it to quickly look at the loot. I had a very limited amount of time, but found some pretty nice loot within these barrels. However, I couldn't even check them all as the horde had arrived. And I had to swim back up near the sharks. Soon enough, I made it to the ship, and was more than happy to have that over with. Okay, I hated that. That wasn't good. That wasn't very good. That wasn't very good, yeah. Yeah, that was bad. Fur leggings, that's great. That's actually really nice right there. But of course, I can't cover Greenland without doing a segment on the Greenland shark. This is perhaps the most bizarre but undeniably fascinating shark that roams our oceans. The Greenland shark lives in the depths of the North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans, and is one of the largest sharks around, as they can grow up to about 24 feet or 7 meters long. And get this, according to the NOAA, they live to be at least 250 years old, but might have the ability to live for over 500 years. And on top of all of that, their meat is toxic to humans. Yeah, they are without a doubt one of the most unique animals I've covered on this channel. I made my way towards the shore on day 76, and at this point, I was just putting whatever I had into my engines. But on a good note, I was getting rather close to my end point. As I spotted land in the distance, I sailed my ship closer to it, and that's when I noticed just how amazing eastern Greenland looked. The water was getting really shallow here, and as I spotted what seemed to be a cabin, the shallows became very evident. So I took out my boat and rowed over to the cabin, only I began freezing on the way. After warming up outside the building, I then entered it, and found some random but alright loot. But naturally, it was the wood that I was more focused on, so I once again got to work on gathering every single log that I could find. But that evening, another wave of darkness surrounded me. Next morning, I finished collecting the wood and I left. Well, not before seeing this horrific sight. Anyways, I started making charcoal as I looked around my boat, and remembered that I still had base review on day 99. For those of you new to the channel, this is where I make my final revisions to my base, and then give it an honest rating on a scale from 1 to 10. Exposition aside, I once again set off, now with my engines full. But as I sailed through day 79, I saw it again. I took a shot at it with my crossbow, but I definitely missed. I decided to just ignore it though, and keep sailing, as a rather important landmark was coming up. So, after trapping the squid beneath my ship, I found the waterway I was looking for, and got my boat out. Only that evening, it appeared again. I really wasn't liking this, but it's not as though I could do anything. So I just got my sleeping bag out and slept. Next morning I continued up this watery path, and ended up seeing one of the coolest natural wonders yet, evident by this massive wall of ice in front of me. The Kangerlussuaq Glacier is the largest glacier on Greenland's east coast, and this glacier is essential to understanding one of Greenland's biggest issues, the melting of the glaciers. See, Kangerlussuaq is on a path of accelerated retreat, and the rest of Greenland's glaciers are following suit. According to the WWF, they are melting about 6 or 7 times faster today than they were 25 years ago, and if all of Greenland's ice sheet were to melt, the sea level would rise a solid 24 feet, or 7 meters. This means that cities like Miami would be submerged. So, what's being done about all this? Well, solutions as simple as building dams have been proposed, as well as more complex solutions like reducing all carbon emissions. But I trust that we will figure it out, as organizations around the world have dedicated themselves to this very purpose. I started to climb the large sheet of ice ahead of me, and when I finally made it to the top, I saw a really beautiful expanse of ice. But it was time to finish the last leg of the trip, as I still had 2 more destinations to get to. So the next morning I went full speed ahead down Greenland's east coast, and as I went further south, the scenery around me got greener. But as I near the end of this journey and head to my final 2 destinations, I'll go ahead and give Greenland my difficulty rating. Greenland was just how I expected, cold and unforgiving. But I'll be honest, I think I got rather lucky. Even though the Qivatoq attacked me on multiple occasions, I was spared from any real polar bear attacks, or shark attacks. So with all the dangers factored in, I give Greenland a very commendable 7.5 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. But now it was time for me to see something that I hadn't seen all episode, as I had reached my second to last location. And even though it was raining, I rode towards it. Those trees. Finally trees. Look at that. Now that is a sight to see. Qinngua Valley. Now I couldn't find any pronunciations for this one, but I did my best. And to be honest, the scenery speaks for itself. Now, while this might be Greenland's only natural forest, I do want to point out that since the late 19th century, people have been planting their own trees in Greenland, but nothing reaches the same level as this incredible valley. And honestly, Minecraft just simply can't do this one justice. I started walking on the nearby land as the final destination wasn't too far from here. Only as I made my journey, I realized that it would be much faster with a certain someone. So I went to get Freddy and ended up moving the boat closer to land. I then got him up on the land, and we started looking around for this final wonder. Only it was rather dreary, and of course, we weren't alone. Except this time, I was going to properly fight it. And then I realized that that was a terrible idea, especially since it broke my armor and I started freezing. We got away from it quickly, and I tried placing my lanterns to warm me up, but no use. So instead, I dug underground. And after a few very tense seconds, I warmed up. Only this is where I tried to put on these fur leggings that crashed my game. So yeah, the fur leggings crashed my game, which means I couldn't enter my world anymore. Not without removing all of the Let's Do mods, which just so happened to include all of my ship decorations on my deck, as well as many other things. So I did end up fixing it, but I lost quite a few things in the process. But at least I didn't lose anything essential, and at least I could pick up right where I left off, which was crawling out of my burrow the next morning. And while I saw the Qivatoq again, it was Freddy who I approached. Yeah, we left it alone, as some things are just meant to be left alone. With that being said, the search for my final location continued through day 89, and I wasn't complaining as everything around us was scenic. But finally, as I doubled back on day 90, I had found it. A treasure of Greenland's past. Hvalsey Church is an ancient remnant of the Vikings who once settled here in Greenland's south coast. Having been built in the 14th century, this is a preserved piece of this island's long-lost past, as the Vikings themselves completely abandoned their Greenland settlements, with the last recorded event at this church being a wedding that was held in 1408. And yeah, this would be the ideal place to hold one. I looked around the ruins, before turning to Freddy, knowing that it was time for me to say goodbye. Okay, Freddy. Yep. It is about that time for you. And yeah, thank you for helping me deal with the Kivitok. That was very helpful. I shall leave you... I'm never going to use these, so... I shall give you a gift of these 6 diamonds. There you go. Best of luck. I started on my trip back to the boat, but because I was freezing as I entered the water, I had to go by land. So that's just what I did, and I reached my ship around midday. However, this is when I ran into an issue, as I couldn't even reach my ship without freezing. So I walked up this nearby hill and thought for a moment, before coming up with an idea. I took out my gravel, and after a ridiculous amount of tries, I finally got some flint. The next morning I bridged over to my boat and placed the fire nearby to warm me up. I then mined into my base and got the food and cobwebs I would need. Then I got some wood from the forest and made a crafting table, before destroying all of the cobwebs only to see that I was 2 strings short of crafting new wool armor. Yeah, this was genuinely upsetting, as the only way for me to get string now was to wait for nightfall. And what's worse, as I waited for nightfall, I started to freeze. So I had no choice but to sleep. Luckily for me though, I woke the next morning to see a burning zombie, and a spider right next to it. And this is it. If the spider doesn't drop 2 string, I genuinely don't know what I'll do. 2 string, let's go, 2 string. Probably way more excited about that than I should be. I happily crafted my wool hood and finally got to work on my base. Next morning I cleared out all of the floors and tried adding a base topper. Only as I sailed my boat, the base topper seemed to move on its own accord. So I took it off and fixed up the top floor, which was my pantry. I then started on the bedroom and finished it the next day, but I ended up having to get more wood. On day 97, I finished the bottom floor and did my best to recreate the deck that I had previously been so proud of. And finally, on my last day before base review, I finished up the deck area and was pretty happy with what I had made this episode, especially since it had gotten me all the way around Greenland. But I still had to review it, and after looking around each room the next day, I did just that. Starting with the pantry, which is pretty basic, but there's nothing wrong with that. It has food, and it serves its purpose. But my bedroom, on the other hand, I quite like. And mostly because of the dive gear, giving it that nautical vibe. For the size of the room, I think the space is used pretty nicely. Now for the bottom floor and deck area. Both are fine, but a bit sad given what I had initially built here. I won't hold that against myself though, as I just wanted to put on some fur leggings. Anyways, after factoring in my favorite part, the exterior, I can happily say that this base has earned a very nice 8 out of 10. Yeah, I really love this one. But as always, there is still one more day left. I walked out onto my deck on day 100, before swimming around the icy waters one last time, while thinking about just how unique this island had been. See, Greenland might be owned by Denmark, but it has a dramatically different landscape, culture, and atmosphere. You could try to compare Greenland to Iceland or northern Canada, but the history and wildlife of this island, paired with everything else I mentioned, make it a place that's not only strikingly unique, but a place that shouldn't be overlooked. And it is. But perhaps this video has convinced you to take another look at the world's icy island, because there just simply isn't anywhere else that's like Greenland. Alright, well with that being said, it is about that time. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.